My name is Maggie Saunders. I'm 64 years old, and I spent most of my life being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's keeper of calm. If I had to describe myself in one word for the past 40 years, it wouldn't be passionate or joyful or even happy. It would be steady. I married Ben when I was 23. He was dependable in the way men often are when they don't make a lot of promises but always show up for dinner. He never raised his voice, never came home drunk, never cheated as far as I know. He just slowly stopped seeing me. We raised 2 kids together. Emily, who now lives in Boston, and Josh, who moved to Denver after college. I was the kind of mom who made homemade Halloween costumes and remembered everyone's dentist appointments. I packed balanced lunches and stayed up until midnight wrapping Christmas gifts, just to make the morning feel magical. I liked being the glue, even when no one noticed it was there. Ben worked long hours at the insurance agency. I stayed home and handled everything else. That was the unspoken agreement. I didn't resent it at first. I actually felt proud to run the house like a quiet machine. Bills were paid, laundry folded, birthdays remembered, dinners on the table at 6. What I didn't realize back then was that being good at disappearing doesn't earn you gratitude. It just teaches everyone how to overlook you more efficiently. I wasn't a martyr. I didn't walk around sighing or expecting applause. I just lowered my expectations year after year until silence felt like affection. There were nights when I'd make a roast or try a new recipe and wait for Ben to say something. He'd eat, rinse his plate, and turn on the news without a word. I used to glance at him hoping for a reaction. Eventually I stopped looking. We had conversation, sure. Grocery lists, family schedules, weather complaints, but not the kind of conversations that make you feel known. I couldn't remember the last time he asked me how I was or what I dreamed about. And I think somewhere deep inside, I convinced myself I no longer needed to be asked. I don't tell you all this to make him sound cruel. He was just there, reliable like a kitchen faucet. You use it every day, but you don't really think about it unless it stops working. I didn't stop working. I just started rusting in place. Some nights I'd sit on the back porch with a cup of tea and watch the stars. The air would be still, the house quiet, and I'd think, this can't be all there is. But I never said it out loud. I didn't want to break the spell of being the one who never complained. People used to say we were lucky. A solid marriage, grown kids, no major drama, and on paper, they were right. But inside, I felt like a book no one ever pulled off the shelf. Pages intact, spine uncracked, just quietly aging in a place no one visited anymore. I was tired, not of doing things, but of not being seen doing them. I was tired of being predictable, of knowing that if I stopped showing up the way I always did, no one would ask why. They'd just adjust. I suppose that's where my story really begins. Not with an argument or a betrayal, but with a long, slow unraveling of someone who once had color and laughter and softness, until all that was left was function. And I didn't want to be a function anymore. I wanted to feel like a person again, not someone who filled roles, someone who filled her own skin. And maybe, if you're still watching, you know that feeling too. That sense that something inside you has been whispering for years, hoping you'll finally hear it. I heard mine one quiet morning, and everything changed. I met Ben when I was 22 and working nights as a floor nurse at a small hospital outside of Raleigh. He came in with a sprained wrist from a softball game, all sheepish charm and tired confidence. We talked for 5 minutes while I wrapped his arm, and 2 weeks later, we were having coffee at a diner that smelled like syrup and floor cleaner. He wasn't the type who made grand gestures. He didn't send flowers or write notes, but he always picked me up on time, held the door open, and paid attention when I spoke. Back then, I thought those things meant he'd be a good husband. Dependable, steady, safe. We got married the following spring. It wasn't a big wedding. My sister made the cake and we borrowed folding chairs from the church. I wore my mother's dress, altered to fit my hips, and we served fried chicken and lemonade in mason jars. It wasn't perfect, but it felt full. I kept working after the wedding. Nights, mostly, so we could save for a down payment. I didn't mind it at first. The shifts were long, but I liked feeling useful. I liked that people needed me. That I could make a difference in someone's pain. Then came Emily. Her due date was early November, but she arrived just before Halloween. I remember Ben crying real tears the only time I've ever seen them. We brought her home wrapped in a yellow blanket, and everything else just faded into the background. I told myself I'd go back to work after 6 months. But then Josh came 3 years later, and suddenly nursing didn't seem possible anymore. The kids needed me. Ben's hours picked up. We were never in crisis, but always trying to keep up. Diapers, carpool, dinner, repeat. I stopped thinking of it as a career break. I started calling it a choice. I chose to stay home. I chose to bake cupcakes for the PTA and organize sock drawers. I told myself it was love. It was motherhood. It was enough. Ben never asked me to quit, but he never asked if I missed it either. He just assumed this was the shape life would take, and I guess I did too. Days turned into months, months into years. Somewhere in the rhythm, I started to disappear. He was never cruel. He didn't yell or criticize, but he also didn't notice when I got a haircut or when I stopped wearing perfume. He didn't ask why I stayed up late reading, or why I cried quietly in the laundry room after birthday parties ended. He said thank you sometimes, usually for dinner. But not always. Not when the house was clean, or the bills were paid on time, or when I caught his favorite show on the DVR without him asking. Those things weren't praiseworthy, they were just expected. Our conversations shrank to logistics. Groceries, kids, calendar notes on the fridge. We stopped asking each other real questions. I couldn't remember the last time he asked what I was excited about or if I was okay. Sometimes I'd test it. I'd say something strange, something out of the blue, just to see if he was listening. He'd nod without looking up or ask me to repeat it, which hurt more. That tiny moment of realizing you're not even background noise, you're silence. On my birthday one year, he brought home a grocery store cake with the wrong name on it. He laughed, said it was close enough. I laughed too, but my chest felt tight for the rest of the night. I cleaned up the plates and didn't mention it again. I used to think our marriage was solid, built on trust and time, but now I realize it was more like an old porch swing. It creaked, it leaned, it held together mostly out of habit and memory. We had good years, family trips, soccer games, laughing over takeout when the power went out. But those moments became fewer, buried under the weight of routine. It wasn't neglect in the dramatic sense. It was just erosion, the kind you don't see until the structure starts to sag. When the kids left for college, I thought we'd rediscover each other, find new hobbies, travel, reconnect. But instead, the silence between us grew louder. He took up golf. I joined a book club. We lived in the same house but in different worlds. I kept trying. I made new recipes. I invited him to art fairs and weekend drives. Sometimes he'd come, sometimes he wouldn't. Most of the time, he'd shrug and say he was tired or had errands to run. I stopped asking after a while. I never wanted fireworks. I just wanted to be seen. Not as the person who filled the fridge or scheduled dentist appointments, but as someone who still had stories to tell, dreams to chase. A name that didn't start with Mom or end in Mrs. But Ben was content. And maybe that's what hurt the most. That he didn't notice the woman beside him had turned into someone she barely recognized. That he didn't ask where I went when I got quiet, or why I started walking alone in the mornings. The saddest part wasn't that I stopped being in love. It was that I stopped believing love was even part of the equation. What we had was a system, reliable, predictable, comfortable. Until one day, it wasn't. And when that day came, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just done pretending that being overlooked was the same as being loved. I had been planning that brunch for almost 2 weeks. Emily and her husband were bringing the kids, and Josh had flown in from Denver to surprise them. It wasn't a holiday or birthday, just one of those rare Sundays when everyone would be in the same place. I wanted it to feel special, like home used to feel. I cleaned the house top to bottom, washed the curtains, ironed the linen napkins that had belonged to my mother. I even polished the silver, though I knew no one would notice. That morning, I was up before the sun. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and browned butter by 7. I made blueberry muffins from scratch, not the boxed kind. Roasted vegetables for a quiche the way Ben used to like, with caramelized onions and thyme. I set the table with fresh flowers and put on a soft playlist in the background. Everything looked like a photo in one of those home magazines. But what I really wanted was for someone to walk in and say it felt warm. Ben came downstairs around 9, already dressed in a golf polo. He was scrolling through his phone as he poured coffee. I told him breakfast was almost ready. He barely looked up and asked if we had this same spread last year. His tone wasn't mean, just uninterested. I smiled and said it was Emily's favorite. He grunted something like, "Oh," and went to turn on the news. I kept moving, kept arranging the silverware just right. kept checking the oven even when I knew the timer still had 5 minutes. When Emily arrived, the kids ran in like a storm. She gave me a distracted wave while talking into her AirPods. Her husband followed behind carrying a soccer bag and asking where he could charge his phone. Josh came in last and gave me a real hug. He smelled the muffins and said the house smelled like high school Saturdays. That made me smile. He always did notice the little things. I poured orange juice, refilled coffee, and reminded the kids not to run. The room was full, but it felt distant. Once we all sat down, conversation bounced between school updates, real estate prices, and vacation plans. I kept watching for some kind of glance from Ben. Some nod that said, "This is nice." But his eyes stayed on his phone, and when I served the quiche, he didn't say a word. Emily took a bite of a muffin and made a face. She asked if I'd changed the recipe. I said no, it was the same one I'd used for years. She mumbled something about the texture being different and put it back on her plate. Ben laughed and said I'd always had a talent for complicating simple things. Then he brought up that birthday cake I made for Josh when he was 6 and forgot the sugar. The table laughed. Even Josh chuckled. He said he thought I was trying to poison him. Ben added that the cake had looked amazing though. He said I always put in the effort, it was just the execution that got me. They laughed again. It wasn't cruel, but it was sharp enough to pierce something I had worked so hard to hold together. I smiled. I nodded. I even dabbed the corner of my mouth like nothing had happened. But inside, I felt something shift. Not break, not snap. Just tilt. I looked at the muffins, still warm. At the flowers I had trimmed with care. At the linen napkins that meant something only to me. I looked at my husband's face, lit by the glow of his phone screen. And I knew I had made all this not just for them. I had made it hoping someone would see me. No one did. Or maybe they did and just didn't think it mattered. I stood up to refill the coffee pot and stayed in the kitchen a little longer than I needed to. No one called for me. No one asked where I went. That silence said everything. I stayed at the table, smiling like I had practiced it. My hands were folded in my lap, and I focused on my plate like it was something I hadn't seen before. The room was full of laughter, full of comfort for everyone except me. They weren't trying to be cruel. That's what made it worse. It was all so casual, like I was the punchline they didn't realize they were using. My cooking, my memory, my effort. It was entertainment, and I was sitting there watching it happen, nodding along like I agreed. Josh tried to soften it. He said the quiche was really good. He looked at me like he meant it, but it came too late. The moment had already landed. The joke had already been made. And it had landed in the middle of my chest. After dessert, I stood up and told everyone I'd start on the dishes. No one offered to help. No one even paused. They moved to the living room, picked up their phones, turned on a game. I walked into the kitchen and ran the tap until the water turned hot. The sound of plates clinking and water running filled the space. I washed each dish slowly, methodically, the same way I had for decades. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I just let the silence wrap around me like something familiar and heavy. My hands moved through soap and water, but my mind wandered to other tables, other meals. Birthday cakes and Sunday pancakes and school lunches with handwritten notes. I had poured so much into feeding them, into making them feel cared for, and now I couldn't even be trusted with a muffin. I realized then that I had become a role, a fixture, something that delivered food and folded laundry and smiled in family photos. They loved me, yes, but in the way you love a chair that's always there to hold your weight, you don't thank it. You just sit. I finished the dishes and wiped down the counter. I dried my hands on the same towel I'd used all morning. Then I stood still for a moment, listening to the laughter from the other room. I felt like a ghost haunting a house she had built with her own hands. That was the moment. It didn't come with tears or a scream, just a quiet, deep understanding that I had let myself become invisible, and no one had stopped me. After the brunch, something in me went still. I didn't make an announcement or slam a door. I just stopped showing up in the ways I always had. The change was so quiet that no one noticed, or if they did, they didn't ask. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. Ben grabbed a granola bar and didn't comment. I didn't remind him about his dentist appointment. He missed it and shrugged like it didn't matter. That night, I reheated leftover soup from a can and set one bowl on the table. He didn't ask where the roast was. He didn't ask anything. I started moving through the house like a guest. I didn't fluff the throw pillows or refill the soap in the guest bathroom. I walked past the pile of shoes by the door and didn't straighten them. I let the kitchen floor stay sticky a little longer than usual. I noticed it. He didn't. I stopped folding his laundry. I stopped checking the fridge for his favorite creamer. I stopped pretending to be part of a team. I watched him come and go. Watched him sit in the same recliner and watch the same shows, never once asking where I had gone. He didn't see I had already left in pieces. There was a strange peace in not trying. It felt foreign at first, like wearing someone else's shoes. But after a few days, it felt like breathing. Not deeply, not fully. But enough to remember I still could. I started waking up earlier than him and taking long walks around the neighborhood. I didn't bring my phone. I didn't leave a note. I just went. The mornings were quiet and cool. I listened to my footsteps and birdsong and the soft rhythm of my breath. It was the only part of the day that felt like mine. When I got home, I didn't rush to start the laundry or unload the dishwasher. I sat at the table with my coffee and stared out the window. I let the minutes pass without purpose. I let the stillness stretch. Ben never asked what I was thinking. He never asked what had changed. And I realized I had spent years hoping someone would notice my effort. Now I was waiting to see if anyone would notice my absence. They didn't. I started to feel like I was watching my own life from the outside, like I was standing at a distance, observing a version of myself going through motions that no longer made sense. I saw the way I filled silence with tasks. I saw how I made space for everyone but myself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was just deliberate. I was pulling back, inch by inch, and no one reached out to stop me. That was all the answer I needed. It was a Tuesday morning when I opened the closet and reached for my old suitcase. It had been tucked behind winter coats and a box of Christmas lights, untouched for years. The zipper was stiff and smelled faintly of lavender from a sachet I had tucked inside a lifetime ago. I pulled out a dress I hadn't worn in over a decade. It was deep green, soft at the waist, and modest in a way that still felt elegant. I slipped it on and stood in front of the mirror, surprised that it still fit, surprised by how much of myself I could still recognize. I folded clothes carefully, not in panic, not in haste. A few sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, the cardigan with the loose button I always meant to fix. I added a framed photo of the kids when they were small and slid my journal into the side pocket. Downstairs, the house was quiet. I heard Ben coming in through the garage, keys jingling, footsteps moving toward the kitchen. He looked at me, then at the suitcase by the stairs, then back again. He asked if I was going somewhere. I didn't hesitate. I said I was going to stay with Nora for a while. He stared like he hadn't heard me right. Like maybe I had said I was going out for groceries and got confused halfway through. He asked why, his voice more confused than upset. I told him I needed to remember who I was. I said it gently, not to hurt him, just to tell the truth. He laughed, a dry, brittle sound. He said something about me playing the victim. I shook my head. Not anymore. I didn't pack everything. I only took what belonged to me. My peace, my voice, my choice. He didn't follow me. He didn't stop me. And in that silence I heard something loud and final. I walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut behind me, but it didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. Nora had the porch light on when I pulled into her driveway. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just opened the door and wrapped me in a hug that didn't require any explanation. The guest room was small and neat. A twin bed with a faded quilt, a lamp that gave off soft light, and a dresser with a vase of fresh flowers. There was a towel folded on the foot of the bed and a note that said, "Make yourself at home," written in Nora's looping handwriting. I sat on the bed and let the silence settle around me. It wasn't heavy, just unfamiliar. No one was calling for dinner. No one needed their keys or asked where the tape was. The quiet wasn't demanding anything from me, and that felt almost wrong. I unzipped my suitcase but didn't unpack. I placed the photo of the kids on the nightstand and set my journal beside it. Then I sat again, hands resting on my lap, unsure of what came next. The clock ticked softly. I listened to Nora moving in the kitchen, her footsteps slow and steady. She brought me tea, smiled, and didn't linger. She knew what silence was made of and didn't try to fill it. When the lights were out and the house was still, I stared at the ceiling. I had spent decades moving, cooking, cleaning, fixing. I didn't know how to be still without a task. I didn't know how to be in a room without wondering what someone else needed. I turned over and looked at the outline of my suitcase in the dark. It felt like it belonged to a stranger. Someone who had packed in quiet desperation but walked out with something like hope. I wasn't sure I knew her yet. I didn't cry. I didn't feel brave either, just unsure. Like I had stepped out of a role and didn't know what to do with my hands anymore. The quiet didn't feel peaceful, not yet, but it felt honest. And maybe that was something. Maybe that was where becoming begins. Not with a breakthrough, just with stillness. Just with listening to yourself breathe and realizing for the first time in a long while, no one is watching, no one is asking, you get to just be. The first few nights I barely slept. I lay on that twin bed with the quilt pulled to my chest, staring into the dim light from the hallway. My body was still, but my thoughts kept moving in circles, trying to make sense of what I had just walked away from. Without a schedule or someone to care for, my days stretched wide and quiet. No one asked where the laundry was. No one needed a reminder for their prescription. There were no calendars to update or lists to cross off. It was freedom, but at first, it felt more like floating. I tried to read. I tried to sit outside with tea. I helped Nora load the dishwasher and sweep the porch. But when the sun went down and the house grew quiet again, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not regret, not fear, just a strange, hollow ache that I didn't know how to name. By the fourth night, I sat at the edge of the bed holding my journal in both hands. I had opened it several times but couldn't bring myself to write a word. I wasn't sure who I was writing as. Wife? Mother? Guest? None of those titles felt quite right anymore. I thought about all the things I had done for years without thinking. The birthdays I planned, the meals I cooked, the way I always made sure Ben's shirts were ironed. I thought about how little of it was ever really seen. Not with real eyes, not with gratitude. And still, I never stopped doing it. That night, the tears came slow and steady. Not loud, not choking. Just warm streaks down my face that I didn't try to wipe away. I let them fall. I let them soak into the collar of my nightgown. I didn't cry for what I left. I cried for what I gave, and for how quietly I had disappeared. Somewhere underneath the grief, I felt something else stir. It wasn't hope exactly. More like awareness. A quiet knowing that I had spent so long being needed, I had forgotten how to be wanted. And now, without all the noise of responsibility, I could finally begin to want myself. That thought stayed with me long after the tears dried. I didn't write it down that night, but I felt it settle in my chest like the start of a new rhythm. I was more than useful. I always had been. I just needed the silence to remember it. The first week after I left, Ben didn't call. I imagined him moving through the house just as he always had, watching the news, eating takeout, tossing his socks on the floor without thinking twice. He probably assumed I was just cooling off, and would come back when I was done being dramatic. But then small things began to stack up. He couldn't find the file with our insurance records. He missed a bill because I wasn't there to remind him it was due. The house was quiet but not in the comforting way. It was hollow, uneasy. He called one afternoon while I was sitting on Nora's porch. His voice was flat, almost casual. He asked if I had a time in mind to come get the rest of my things. I told him I had already taken what I needed. He paused, like he didn't quite understand what I meant. He asked if that meant not yet. I said no. I meant not at all. There was another silence on the line. Then he said it was sad. Like this was just some passing misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. I let the word sit there between us. Sad. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was coming back. He only noticed the shape of what was missing. Not me exactly, but the things I did, the ways I filled the gaps. After we hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clear. My absence was finally louder than my presence ever was. And for the first time, I didn't shrink from that truth. I let it echo. I let it speak for me. It started with a text from Emily. She said Dad mentioned I wasn't answering his calls and asked if I was okay. In the past, I would have replied right away with something soft and reassuring, even if I was crumbling underneath. This time, I waited. I let myself feel the weight of the question, not just the instinct to soothe. Then I wrote back, "I'm okay. I just don't want to keep pretending I'm not hurt." There was no reply that night. I imagined her sitting with those words, maybe reading them more than once. She had always seen me as the stable one, the fixer, the mom who kept things together no matter how cracked they were underneath. 3 days later, another message came. I guess I didn't realize how far things had gone. "I'm sorry." I read it twice. Not because I didn't believe her, but because it felt like the first time she had seen me not as a mother, but as a woman with limits. I didn't rush to fix the moment. I didn't say it was okay. Instead, I said I appreciate you saying that. I'm figuring things out right now. That was enough. Josh called that same week. He didn't ask what happened between me and his father. He just asked how I was sleeping. Then he said he missed my cooking. I told him I missed it too. Not the work, the part where people actually noticed. There was kindness in their reaching out, but there was also a shift. They were listening differently now. I wasn't trying to earn their love with casseroles or clean baseboards. I was showing them who I was when I wasn't doing anything for them. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase years of assumptions. But it cracked something open, a small space where honesty could live, a place where I didn't have to disappear to be loved. I could just be. And they could meet me there. Ben texted me one afternoon. He said he had found a few of my things in the attic and asked if I wanted to come by and pick them up. He offered to be out of the house while I was there, or stay if I preferred. The message was careful, almost soft. I told him I would come by the next day. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked the same but slightly off. The front steps leaned a little more than I remembered. The garden beds were overgrown with weeds I would have pulled without thinking. The house looked tired. He opened the door before I knocked. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in the way people do when time catches up with them all at once. He said he didn't expect me to actually come. I said I didn't expect him to ask. Inside, it smelled like dust and leftover coffee. The dining table still had the same placemats. My framed photo of the kids was gone from the hallway shelf. I noticed the absence like a breath held too long. There were 2 boxes by the staircase. He pointed to them. Cookbooks, a few scarves, some framed photos, my mother's shawl. Things I hadn't even realized were missing until I saw them. He said he didn't know what to do with them. I said thank you. I opened one box and ran my hand over the corner of a photo album. It felt strange to touch the past like that. Not painful, just distant. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said he had read my journal. He found it in the nightstand drawer I must have forgotten to check. His voice was quiet. I didn't leave it for him. He nodded and said he knew, but he needed to understand. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said if he read it, then he already knew. I stopped being your wife long before I packed my suitcase. He didn't argue. He just looked at the floor and said he thought I'd always be there, like the floor or the roof, constant, unmovable. I told him I tried to tell him, not with shouting, but with showing up, with effort, with hope. He said he didn't know how to love someone who didn't need fixing. He said he didn't know what to do with someone who was whole. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't soften the truth. I told him I wasn't there to blame him. I was there to say goodbye. I picked up the smallest box and walked to the door. He stayed where he was, hands in his pockets, shoulders a little slouched. I paused with my hand on the handle and turned back one last time. For what it's worth, I said, I hope one day you learn to see people before they leave. Then I stepped outside. The sun was warm on my face. The air felt lighter. And for the first time in that house, I didn't carry anything I didn't choose. Closure didn't come from anything he said. It came from the fact that I didn't need him to say anything more. I had already left. The rest was just confirmation. The cabin sits at the edge of a quiet lake, tucked between tall pines that sway in the breeze like old friends whispering. The water is still most mornings, just a thin line of ripples where ducks glide past. I drink my coffee on the porch and listen to the way the world hums when no one is asking anything from me. I planted lavender by the front steps. It took to the soil quickly, as if it had just been waiting for someone to believe it could grow there. Now the scent follows me in and out of the house, clinging to my sleeves and the pages of the books I leave open on the couch. I bake bread once a week, just enough for myself and a few neighbors. The smell fills the whole cabin and makes it feel warm even on gray afternoons. I knead the dough slowly, not because I need to feed anyone, but because I like the way it feels to make something with care. There's a little community center down the road where I teach watercolor on Thursdays. Nothing fancy, just a small group of women who laugh more than they paint. We sit around a long table, dipping brushes into bowls of color, telling stories while soft music plays. It's the most alive I've felt in years. Sometimes I drive into town for groceries or a new candle. Sometimes I don't leave the property for days. I have a radio, a kettle, a stack of novels, and more peace than I ever thought possible. No one calls me unless they mean it. No one needs me to fix anything. I just exist, and that has become enough. I write in my journal most nights, not out of habit but out of curiosity. I want to know what this version of me has to say. I don't write about the past anymore. I write about the tomatoes I planted, the dream I had, The joke someone told me at the farmer's market? Emily visits every few weeks. Josh sends postcards from wherever work takes him. They don't ask me to return. They ask how I am. And when I answer, they listen like they want to know. It's not perfect, but it's real. And it's new. Ben hasn't called again. I don't think he will. I don't think he knows what to say. That's all right. Some stories are meant to stay finished. Some doors don't need to be opened twice. The cabin doesn't have a dishwasher. I wash everything by hand and let the dishes air dry on a wooden rack by the window. There's something satisfying about that quiet rhythm. Rinse, rest, begin again. At night, I light a candle and sit by the window, watching the sky turn blue, then gray, then black. I don't feel lonely. I feel full. Not busy. Just whole. I didn't leave to be alone. I left to become whole. And I did.